Hi everyone, welcome to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in for this special pop-up coverage here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. GoLocal has been around the state earlier this morning where you can find videos and interviews with candidates from Governor Gina Raimondo, General Treasurer Seth Magaziner, Congressman David Cicilline, independent candidate for Mayor Dee Dee Whitman, Cranston Mayor and gubernatorial candidate Alan Fung, and more on GoLocal. And we'll also be bringing photos from polling places from around the state shortly. But we'd like to take this opportunity to welcome in a guest who's been on here before, Spencer Sullivan, Rhode Island native, now consultant down in D.C., CEO and founder of Lean Campaign Strategies. Spencer, thanks for joining us today.
Just happy to be on.
Well, I know that you're busy. You've got a number of horses in races around the country, but really want to get your sense as to what you're hearing and seeing nationally, especially in terms of turnout. Now, there's been some talk here that turnout has looked high for midterms. What are you seeing around the country, Spencer?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Obviously, all the campaigns come down to just turnout today. There's nothing else there's no more messaging. There's no more strategy. It's just dragging voters to the polls and trying to have as many touches as possible with those voters, right? So we're seeing high turnout for the most part on average, and a huge part of that is because the early vote or the early voting phases have been higher than normal, which is also due to the fact that as more people get informed of how easy it is to vote early, more people vote early because they don't want to stand in lines on election day. So you have a combination of more early votes, which could contribute to not only the voter intensity on both sides of this election. Obviously, it's very high, but also even with the weather impacting, I would say, most of the East Coast, down all the way down to Florida, in which it's probably rainy and cold, which, to be honest with you, rain does impact turnout. So weather can have an impact on turnout, but for the most part, I think what we're seeing here is a healthy turnout so far. You're going to see a dip in the middle of the day, then also a surge towards the end of the night as well.
Well, we're going to continue to take a look at that here. We've had a little bit of rain earlier today. It looks supposed to be heavier rain later on today. And of course, we're going to be back later with more coverage. Let's talk about the last recent few weeks, Spencer, and especially let's look at the administration of President Donald Trump and his rallies and how he's been trying to rally the base, whether it's talking about the caravans coming through Mexico towards the U.S., comments he's made about the 14th Amendment. He's been particularly active again in these last few days leading up to the election. How does this break down depending on who his candidates are in which districts?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Part of what we've seen here in a lot of people like to say in a traditional midterm year, but there's nothing traditional about President Trump. Clearly, President Trump has made this more about himself as a president than most previous presidents have had during midterms, right? So most previous presidents will make it more about an issue or a kind of not step away from the spotlight, but won't be in the spotlight as much as possible because they know it's usually a referendum on check and balance on the incumbent president, right? Donald Trump has done the exact opposite. Donald Trump has put himself on the ballot as much as possible, and he's also obviously has talked a lot more about the immigration. Something that the Democrats don't want to talk about. And I chalk this up, I kind of credit this to him, is there's two different issues. There may be one issue in which a voter will support a candidate, which may be the economy or healthcare, but it also could be for that same voter a different issue that motivates someone to go out to vote. So I think what you're seeing here is both parties, Democrats and Republicans, President Trump and the Democratic leadership, trying to find those issues that not only persuade, but really do motivate those hot-button issues like immigration, clearly, in the past couple cycles, past couple years, and the way that he has talked about it to motivate his base to go out to vote. So I think what he's really doing here is not only talking, obviously shying a little bit away from the economy. He does talk about that a lot, but obviously with the shift to immigration and the caravan, talking to issues that really would motivate or give a sense of urgency for a voter to go vote.
Let's talk a little bit too, especially perhaps maybe those Republicans and tough fights about that rhetoric coming from the administration. You know, we see it here. We have Cranston Mayor Alan Fung, who very much had originally distanced himself from Trump, but finding himself in a battle with Joe Trillo, the former Trump honorary campaign chair here. How do some Republicans in those districts, again, especially with really close battles, walk that fine line? And let's break it down. Depends on, I'm sure, where it is.
Yeah, in the traditional swing district, it's very tough. And we have a very swing district right where I live, Barbara Comstock's district. Kind of tends to flip seats. It's a very suburban district, very educated district. A great example of a lot of the seats that either the Republicans need to win or the Democrats need to win to get control of the House, right? So I think there's a healthy distance that a candidate needs to separate themselves from Trump on certain issues in which they think they need to speak out. And I'm not shocked that the immigration issue may be one of them. I would also say that there's a healthy part here in which you need to embrace the President Trump, because his base is really motivated to turn out and really doesn't take any prisoners, per se.
No.
But I would say more importantly, Kate, I know you and I have talked about this before, it's those candidates that have their own personal brand outside each party that will be successful. So a lot of these battleground districts, the Republican candidates are competitors. They've been in these street brawls before. They understand how tough it is. They have their own personal brands, right? And that's what really will persuade a voter to vote for, even if they don't agree with President Trump, but what traditionally leaning Republican would be that personal brand of that House of Representative candidate, in which they know, this person may not be all in for President Trump, but I agree with them economically. I agree with them 2/3 of the time, but I also know this person is going to utilize common sense as my representative and stand with me or stand with my vote.
Speaking of the economy and the strength of the economy in particular, with recent numbers that have come out as well, how much, and again, depending on the candidate, is that really a point that Republicans are pointing to as they head to the polls?
Yeah, I wish that's something we would talk about more. I think that's something in which, yet again, I think a lot of these candidates are talking about the economy. Healthcare is a big issue as well. But with President Trump sucking up so much of the oxygen, it's tough to get a different message out from your own campaign, right? And this is one of the unique things about this midterm is not only do we have an economy that's doing so well, the unemployment is at all-time lows, the GDP is growing at a very healthy rate, in which that would be more than enough. And you think for a traditional year, which this is not because we don't have a traditional president, in which the focus would be on, right? And so, yeah, people will vote with the wallets, but also their wallets are doing well. They may have the energy or the time to maybe focus on the second or third issue that may seem a little bit more pressing at the time because their wallets are not hurting. Yeah, people are making more money. Unemployment's at an all low. They're taking more back from their paycheck. All great things. But is that enough to, is that enough for a lot of these, I would say, suburban voters, educated college voters, to overlook the president's style? And that's what this really comes down to. There are these suburban districts that, Republicans have held for years, and the majority of 23 seats on the House side. Can they hang on within those districts to convince those educated suburban voters to stay with the Republican Party?
So all this talk, blue wave, blue wave, blue wave. When the chips fall this evening, do you think things are going to be closer than what we've been hearing?
If you asked me 2 months ago, I would say there was a blue wave, but things happened. I think the Kavanaugh hearing had a big role in that. You saw the Republican intensity spike after that hearing. You saw kind of a little bit more of a spike around this immigration conversation, whether it's a rally or not. It's a spike in voter intensity, right? So I think what you're going to see here, and traditionally, the party at the White House loses seats. I mean, that's been, except for 2 elections since the Civil War, that's what has happened. And when you're in the majority by 23 seats, you've won so many seats, it's natural for you to lose a couple seats. So I think you're going to see here on the House side, the question is, how many seats do the Republicans lose? Is it 23, which would put the Democrats in majority, or do they hang on? I think it's going to be a very close call. I have an optimism in me that say the Republicans hang on plus 3-4 seats, but that same optimism can also just be called Republicans may lose it by 3 or 4 seats. I think a lot of this is going to come down. We probably will not find out tonight, If we find out tonight, I will say it's probably a blue wave because it's pretty clear at that point. But if it's a close call and it's going to take a little bit longer to do the recounts and get through the stuff, especially on the West Coast, as polls close late, we'll see. On the Senate side, the Republicans are in great shape to gain a couple seats. And I think Florida is a completely interesting state to watch in terms of a governorship and a senator seat as well.
You've got so much to watch this evening between, again, your candidates and the direction of the country as well. We had the opportunity this morning, Spencer, to catch up with Congressman David Cicilline, who, as you know, is eyeing the #4 leadership position if the Democrats are to take control of the House. And folks were asking him, what would that mean for Rhode Island? Does the #4 position hold some clout for the person who holds that in the district they represent?
Yeah, I would say anytime you get into leadership, it holds more clout. I think this might give David Cicilline some clout on the Hill for the first time in a number of years, in which he hasn't had. But again, this all comes down to whether they win and whether he's going to support Nancy Pelosi. And I think obviously that sounds like he will. And Nancy Pelosi is a complete disaster in terms of her reign so far, and has been nothing but successful for Republicans to fundraise and win again. So there's probably, I can name about 10 things that Republicans fear. And it would be, and I think #2 would be Nancy Pelosi being the Speaker of the House. So in terms of motivating and voter intensity, I mean, I welcome it at the same time.
So what else are we keeping an eye on? One of the things I do want to ask you, as being a native Rhode Islander looking at the race here, GoLocal was recently in the polls with John Della Volpe looking at the governor's race and had a Trillo as high as 17%. Now, when we look at the end of the evening where things fall here, do you see Trillo being able to capture double digits and get into the teens?
Yeah, that's a great question. To be honest with you, and this is not me pitching you guys, I think as a former Rhode Islander and who likes to keep track of Rhode Island politics, GoLocal has been great, especially with John Volpe. I would say this: I've never seen a third-party candidate who, at the highest of 17%, has garnered as much attention as he has. I think this speaks probably a bit more so about the weakness of both Democrats and the Republican Party in the state of Rhode Island. We'll see. It's any given Sunday, any given Tuesday, right? But it's been great to kind of watch this unfold and kind of the blame game on that side. But I think at the end of the day, it speaks more to the weakness of both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party up in the state of Rhode Island.
We saw a three-way back in 14 as well when Bob Healy was a bit of a spoiler as well. And I know you've had some tweets and some reaction to the primary here after we saw some very vitriolic infighting amongst Republicans after Patricia Morgan endorsed Joe Trillo. Talk a little bit about that. Does the Republican Party emerge from 18 just so bruised and bloodied? How does the Republican Party here move past this?
Yeah, for the state of Rhode Island, I'd say that they probably emerged bruised and bloody in 16 and 14 and 12 and 10. Or maybe not so much in 10, but it's one of those things where it continues to happen. So I think until and I'm a Republican, obviously. I tend to look at my side of the party harsher than I look at the other side of the party than the other side, to be honest with you. But it's one of those things where you need to build the bench in the state of Rhode Island. You need to get fresh blood, but also have serious candidates who are willing to fundraise, who are willing to go out there and talk to voters, who are willing to get the message out there first instead of being responsive or just saying I can't fundraise money, right? So I think it's a combination of all those things. Maybe this could be rock bottom. Maybe the Republican Party gets to rock bottom in 2020, 2022. Who knows? But again, it's interesting to watch. I would love for it to be a little bit more successful. We'll see how that ends up, though.
Well, I appreciate your taking the time out of a very busy day with having about a dozen candidates all around the country as the president and founder CEO of Lean Campaign Strategies down in D.C., but of course, Rhode Island native. So Spencer Sullivan, thank you so much for taking the time to Skype in today.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate.
Okay, thanks. We're going to let Spencer go. We're going to be back here this afternoon later on in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Former GOP congressional candidate and superintendent of the Rhode Island State Police, Brendan Doherty, will be kicking off coverage this evening and more. So we look forward to seeing you here at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center later today. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel.